Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 11 of physics. Over halfway done, so make sure you keep watching the entire videos and doing the best possible work you can. By now, a lot of you are noticing that I am really looking at the quality of your work and not just are you getting it done. Okay. But the good news is, if you complete this online course, you will get a full 5 credits of physics. Just doing the work doesn't mean you're going to pass. You really have to be doing passing work. Okay, so here we are in day 11. Today we are going to do a little bit of a review, but our goal here in blue is I can design experiments and consider the importance of systemic and random error. So I will go over the agenda soon, but first I want to do a little bit of last class review. So the last few classes we've been talking about these things called pendulums. A pendulum is a mass on a string that moves back and forth, just like this thing here, okay? One complete swing back and forth is called a period. So from right now, that is a period, okay? So that should say a period. Let me fix it right now. A period is a complete swing back and forth. And different variables might or might not affect the speed at which the pendulum moves back and forth. And that's going to be the point of this lab, to test which variables do affect it and which ones don't. And these are the variables that you can test on the online lab. You can test mass, the length of the string, the angle, how far you pull it back, the amount of friction, and also the amount of gravity. Okay? So last class, we introduced the first investigation question, which we're going to be answering together as a class, okay? Does the amount of gravity affect the period of a pendulum, okay? So does how much gravity there is affect the period of a pendulum, okay? And then last class, you should have collected your data and graphed your data. Because I have to record this lesson before this previous lesson is due, I don't have any feedback for you yet. But tonight I'm going to be looking at your graphs and your data tables, and we will discuss and give feedback the following day and then do our conclusion, okay? So today I'm going to be giving feedback, and next class we're going to be working on our conclusion. What we're going to be doing today is taking some notes and answering some check for understanding questions, okay? So today you're going to be taking some notes in your notebook on variables and reducing error. You're going to be answering check for understanding questions in your notes. And then you're going to be submitting that to Seesaw, okay? All right, so you're going to have to pause the video quite a lot today and take the notes, okay? So you're not going to be able to take the notes as fast as I talk, so feel free to pause the video and write it down, okay? So first off, go to the next blank page or blank piece of paper and give it this title: Variables and Errors Notes. Pause the video until you have that done. Remember, you will need to write this down because you are submitting it on Seesaw. I'm going to be looking for, did you write down the notes? And if I don't see it, unfortunately, I won't be able to give you credit for today's work. This is the assignment, the notes and the questions, okay? So we're going to start the notes. We're talking about independent and dependent variables. I would like you to write this down in your notes, what I have right here, okay? A variable is something that changes. Think of the word vary. Vary means to change around. If you vary your clothing style, you're changing it. So a variable is something that changes. In a typical science experiment, let me remove myself, you can change one variable on purpose and see what happens to another variable, okay? So that's what a lot of science experiments are all about, changing one variable and seeing how it affects a different variable, okay? And that's why we need to know the difference between independent, dependent, and control variables. This is really part of the essence of scientific experimentation and science, okay? So pause the video and write this down in your notes. You don't need to draw the diagram. And then when you're done, you may unpause. So let's first talk about what an independent variable is, okay? Independent variable, write this down in your notes. This is the variable that is controlled in an experiment, the one that you control and the one that you manipulate or the one that you change on purpose, okay? So the independent variable is changed to test the effect on the dependent variable, okay? So what variable are you changing on purpose? Which one are you in control of? That is your independent variable, okay? And this one always goes on the x-axis, okay? The dependent variable, so pause, write this down, by the way. Okay, these are your notes. And then let's talk about the dependent variable. The dependent variable, this is the variable that's being tested or measured in an experiment. Okay, the one that's being tested or measured. It goes on your y-axis, and that's all that it is for dependent variable. So pause and write this down. Okay. And then lastly, we have these things called control variables. Control variables are variables that are not changed throughout the experiment. Like I said earlier, we only change one variable and we measure the other one. Everything else has to stay the same. Those are called control variables. Okay. And they're really important. If a control variable wasn't held constant, the scientists wouldn't know if the independent variable affected the dependent variable. For example, in this lab, we're seeing, does gravity affect the period of a pendulum? But if we change gravity and we also change the mass of the bob and the length of the string and the angle, and we see the periods getting faster, we don't know, was it the gravity that made it faster? Was it the length of the string that made it faster? Was it the mass that made it faster? We just don't know. That's why we only change one variable. If we change gravity and leave everything else the same, and we see the pendulum move faster as gravity goes up, then we know it has to be gravity that's making that pendulum faster. Okay? All right, so pause the video and make sure you're writing this down. And then I like this little graphic. You can write this down in your notes as well. The independent variable affects change in the dependent variable. Okay, so the independent variable, this is where you control. This can cause change or affect change in the dependent variable. And let's do a couple of self-checks. So these next few slides, I'm going to put up a slide. You're going to read it. I'll read it to you and then pause the video till you feel like you know the answer. All right, so let me read this one to you. A 9th grade physics student does an experiment to see if length of string affects the period of a pendulum. So let me read that one more time. A physics student does an experiment to see if length of string, how long the string is, affects the period of a pendulum. So imagine what the student would be doing. They would probably start with a really small string and measure the period, then a medium string, then a longer string, then a really long string to measure the length of, and then measure the length of the period. And they want to know, does how long the string is affect the period of a pendulum? So my question is, what are the dependent and the independent variables, and how do you know? Pause the video and answer this out loud. Okay, this is good practice for our next quiz. By now, you should have figured out what is the independent and the dependent variables. Okay, you will be tested on this, and we'll need to know this for our next experiment. The independent variable, the independent variable, this is the length of the string. This is what you're changing on purpose, what you're controlling. You decide how small the string is first, how big the next one is, etc. The dependent variable, this is what you're measuring. This is the period of the pendulum, or the time it takes to move back and forth, okay? Because that's what you're measuring, all right? Let's do one more check here, okay? So let me read this one to you. A student does an experiment to see if amount of water affects height of plant. What are the dependent and independent variables, and how do you know? Also, what are the control variables? Go ahead and pause the video, think about this, and then we will go over it. So in this case, the student wants to know, does the amount of water make the plant grow taller? Okay, so the student is controlling how much water they're giving it. Maybe they give one plant a little bit of water, maybe they give the next one a medium amount of water, and they give a third plant a whole lot of water. The independent variable, the thing that the student is controlling, is the amount of water, because that's what the student is controlling and changing on purpose. What is the student measuring? The student is measuring the height of the plant. That is our dependent variable, the height of the plant, because we're trying to see, does amount of water affect the height of the plant? What are the control variables? This is really important. What is the student keeping the same? So the student probably wants to keep the amount of sunlight the same, right? It wouldn't be right if the one with a lot of water, they also put in the sun, or the one with a little water, they kept in the dark. That wouldn't make sense. So they both have the same amount of sunlight, the same type of plant, the same type of soil, the same type of planter, this orange thing down here. They want to keep everything else the same. Okay, those are the control variables. And finally, we're going to also talk about error. So in your notes, we're going to finish with talking a little bit about experimental error, okay, and how we can do better experiments, okay? So write this down, please. Experimental error, we're back in our notebooks, is unavoidable in an experiment. There's always going to be some error, okay? However, steps can be done to reduce error and get the best possible data. So pause the video and write this down. Also, there are two types of error worth discussing, and we're going to go over those, okay? So pause the video, and then when you're done writing this down, you may go on. So first is random error. What is random error? Random error are random differences that happen each trial. Maybe you hit the stopwatch a little bit late, or maybe you're dropping something and the bag hits the wall on the way down. Doesn't matter, okay? But these are little tiny differences that can happen each trial. Maybe you're doing the best you can, but you probably noticed if you timed that pendulum, each time was a little bit different. That's because of random error. So random error can only be reduced by doing more than one trial and taking the average. That's why I wanted you to do 3 trials. Trial 1, trial 2, trial 3. All these times were probably different, and then you take the average. The reason we did that was to reduce random error. Little tiny differences that happen each trial. So pause the video and write that down. Then let's talk about systematic error. Okay, our second type of error. This is error in your experimental design. Your experiment itself is flawed, okay? So are you keeping as many variables as possible the same? One example would be maybe you make more gravity, but you don't pause to make that pendulum swing at the exact same angle. That could be a big error. Maybe you make more gravity and you also change the mass as well. Those are examples of systematic error. You're not keeping the variables the same as possible. Okay, maybe the length of the string isn't the same each trial, okay, or the angle's not the same. Maybe you're not pulling the pendulum to the exact same angle, okay? So you have to be precise. So pause the video and write this down. This is our example of systematic error. So that concludes today's notes. What I'm going to have you do once we get done with this whole video is post it to Seesaw. Today you're going to actually post your notes to Seesaw, like I said, and you're also going to post the understanding questions to Seesaw as well. So don't post it yet. We're going to add a page for some check for understanding questions, and that's going to be today's assignment, okay? So they can be on the same page or a separate page. By now you probably need a separate page for these questions, okay? And make sure you're answering them in complete sentences, okay? So draw a line in your notes or go to the next page and give it this title, Understanding Questions for the 7/16 notes. That's today's date. Pause the video until you have this done. Okay. And once you have this done, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna display the questions. I'm gonna read it to you, the questions, and then you're gonna pause the video, go back, look at your notes, and answer the questions. There's actually 2 slides of questions for 9 questions total, okay? Answer them in complete sentences and listen to me when I tell you what words to use, okay? So here are the questions. You don't need to write them down, but you do need to answer in complete sentence. Number 1, what was the independent variable in the pendulum experiment that we did, and explain why? So the experiment that we did was, does gravity affect the period of the pendulum? What was the independent variable? It was either going to be gravity or period. Think about it and explain why. What was the dependent variable in the pendulum experiment? Again, it's either going to be gravity or period. Those were our 2 variables, and explain why. What axis does the independent variable go on? That should be something that you can look in your notes and find out. In your own words, explain what a control variable is. So go back, look at your notes. How did I define control variable? And now put that in your own words. Number 5. What were the 4 control variables in the experiment that we did, okay? Gravity is not a control variable, but there were 4 other things that you had to keep the same. And if you're stuck on what those were, go back and look at the actual pendulum lab, and you should be able to figure those out, okay? So pause the video until you have these done, and then there's one more slide of notes. Okay? And now our last 4 questions about error. So in your own words, explain what random error is. I want you to go back, read your definition, listen to me explain it, and then rewrite what random error is in your own words. What do we do in the experiment to reduce random error? That's in your notes. Okay. Number 8, in your own words, explain what systematic error is. Go back, read my definition, and put it in your own words. And then number 9, what do we do in the experiment to reduce systematic error? Okay, I'll give you a hint. We should have kept all those other variables the same. We didn't change the angle, or you shouldn't have. You didn't change the length or the mass or the friction. We kept everything the same. Okay, so pause the video and make sure you're answering these 4 questions. So what is due today? Today you're going to watch the video. Hopefully I figured out Edpuzzle by now, but if not, then you made it this far. Great job. So watch the video on Edpuzzle. Take the notes in your notebook. Answer the check for understanding questions in your notebook. And then upload a photo of your notes and the questions to Seesaw. It'll probably be multiple photos, and that's fine. Look for this assignment, day 11, variables and error, notes and questions. I want to see your notes and the answers to your questions. Take good pictures so I can see it easily and I can actually read it. Okay, if I can't read it, I may be calling home to ask you to repost it. Okay, have a great day, and I look forward to seeing this in Seesaw. See you next class.